In the year 48 of the Common Era, a girl of just 15 summers steps across the threshold of the Palatine Palace, her form draped in clinging white silk. A crown of myrtle leaves adorns her golden hair as the Senate rises to its feet and the people roar their approval. The Emperor Claudius, a man of 50 years, his left leg dragging ever so slightly, his speech caught in his throat, takes her delicate hand into his own. His name is already a legend. Hers will become a byword for something else entirely. Valeria Messalina. Remember that name, for Rome itself tried to erase it. They look to her now as their salvation. The stains from Caligula's assassination are barely scrubbed from the palace corridors, marking the end of 4 years of sheer madness and executions staged for sport. A time when depravity was paraded as policy, a reign so unhinged his own guards were forced to cut him down in a tunnel beneath this very palace. Now, Rome craves stability, virtue, and above all, heirs. They present her as the face of salvation. Yet within a decade, she will transform this palace into a place the ancient sources can only describe with trembling hands. This is a chapter of Rome's dark history they could barely commit to parchment. Senators will become her captives, and the daughters of aristocrats will vanish into her chambers, only to return, changed, silenced, and broken, bound by secrets they would carry to their graves. She will orchestrate schemes of blackmail on a scale that would give even modern intelligence agencies pause. In broad daylight and with witnesses, she will marry another man while still the empress, as if daring the very soul of Rome to stop her. And when they finally do, her statues will be torn down, dragged through the streets, and shattered, her name chiseled from every monument, and official records rewritten to pretend she never existed at all. Damnatio memoriae, the damnation of memory. Yet 2,000 years later, you are still here, still listening, because the parts of its dark history Rome tried hardest to erase are the very stories we cannot resist unearthing. It begs the question, what happens when corruption is no longer a symptom of power, but the very source of it? Let's rewind to the year 38. The Roman Forum is a cacophony of life, merchants hawking silks, senators debating the price of grain, and children darting between the towering columns. On the surface, Rome appears invincible, but the rot has already taken hold. Tiberius died just 2 years prior, a paranoid and hated recluse, alone on his island of Capri. Then came Caligula, unleashing 4 years of absolute madness. Executions became public entertainment, and a horse was famously appointed to the Senate. Senators were compelled to witness him debase their wives at his dinner table. When the Praetorian Guard finally acted on January 24th in the year 41, it took 29 stab wounds to end his reign. His wife lay dead beside him, their infant daughter's head brutally dashed against a wall. Rome let out a collective breath, and then immediately panicked. Who would rule next? They found him cowering behind a curtain, Claudius, the stammering uncle, the family's great embarrassment with his limp and his drool. At 50 years old, he had never desired power, and certainly never expected it. The guard proclaimed him emperor regardless, not for his qualifications, but because he was alive, and Rome desperately needed someone in the imperial purple before the city devoured itself. Claudius understood he was merely a placeholder. He required legitimacy, and fast, an heir, the start of a dynasty, and proof that the gods had not utterly abandoned Rome. And so, he marries Valeria Messalina, his third cousin, a mere 15 years of age, with a bloodline that traced all the way back to the hero Aeneas himself. She possessed a beauty that poets could build entire careers describing: skin like alabaster, hair of spun gold, and features so perfect they seemed carved from marble. From birth, she was groomed for this role, educated in virtue, and taught to lower her eyes, to speak softly, to embody the very chastity that was believed to hold civilization together. On paper, she was the perfect empress. The Senate gave its approval, the people cheered, and it seemed the empire finally had a future again. But this raises the question no one dared to ask. What happens when you take a child and costume her as a living goddess, placing her in a palace where every door swings open at her command? A world where senators bow before her, where her husband is more than twice her age and terrified of losing his grip on power. A world where she is told her entire value resides within her womb and her supposed purity. What happens when you demand she be modest, obedient, and chaste, a living symbol of virtue in a city built on a foundation of dark history? What occurs when you bestow absolute power upon someone with a single command do not use it, and the divide between her public facade and her private cravings widens into an unbridgeable abyss. The Roman Empire was on the verge of discovering the answer. If this pivotal moment doesn't compel you to remain and witness what unfolds when authority collides with forbidden passion, you're ignoring a critical lesson from our dark history. For what follows is not merely a scandal, it is the blueprint for how great empires begin to rot from within, starting in the bedchamber, not on the battlefield. Before we delve deeper, if you are fascinated by the kind of documented dark history that standard textbooks dare not mention, show your support by liking and subscribing so we can unearth more tales like this one. Now, let us return to our story. The initial 2 years of her reign were a picture of perfection. Messalina presented Claudius with a daughter, the young Claudia Octavia, and then a son, Britannicus, his name a tribute to his father's triumphant conquest of Britain. A collective sigh of relief swept through the Senate. The empire finally had its heirs. At official state functions, she was the epitome of modesty, draped in a simple stola, her head veiled and her gaze lowered, every single movement a carefully choreographed display of Roman virtue. She was the flawless Roman matron. In the public eye, she embodied everything the empire demanded of her. Yet in private, Rome had always sorted its women into 2 distinct classes, the matrona and the meretrix, the dutiful wife and the paid courtesan, the sacred vessel and the profane temptation. One was confined to the atrium, tasked with raising children and safeguarding the family's honor. The other resided in the lupanar, the city's brothels, where men could cast off the veneer of civilization like a heavy cloak. This entire system functioned only because these 2 worlds were never meant to collide. Messalina, however, chose to inhabit both. The first rumors began to circulate around the year 42 of the Common Era. A certain senator, returning late from Ostia after business detained him, found himself spending an unexpected night in Rome. Acting on a sudden impulse, he made his way to the Suburra, Rome's notorious red light district, a maze of narrow streets thick with the stench of stale wine and waste, and filled with cramped tenements where oil lamps cast a dim glow, allowing anyone to vanish into the shadows. He selected a room and paid his coin. The woman who entered wore a dark wig, her eyes heavily lined with smudged coal, and was drenched in a perfume that seemed desperate to mask something, a cloying mix of myrrh and roses barely concealing a far more expensive scent beneath. As she turned to face him, their eyes met. He froze, recognizing the Empress of Rome. It was not some uncanny look-alike, nor a figment of rumor, it was her. According to the historian Tacitus, who was, admittedly, writing decades after the fact, and yes, with his own political agenda, but who also had access to palace insiders. This was no isolated incident. Messalina had reportedly taken on the working name Lycisca and established herself as a regular at a particular brothel managed by a woman named Chilla. She did this not for money, nor out of any desperation, but purely for the intoxicating thrill. Consider the psychology at play here. Every client who failed to recognize her was an unwitting participant in her deception, and every man who did recognize her instantly became a man she owned. For what recourse did he have? Report the Empress. And to whom would he report her? She wasn't merely breaking the rules, she was weaponizing the very hypocrisy upon which they were built, a truly sinister turn in Rome's dark history. After all, Roman morality was, for the elite, little more than a performance. Senators openly kept mistresses, generals frequented brothels, and married men took their pleasure with enslaved people, and no one batted an eye. But the women, particularly aristocratic women, and most especially the Empress herself, were expected to exist above all carnal desire, to be like marble statues, mere vessels for procreation, living symbols of purity. Messalina gazed upon this gilded cage and simply walked out the door. She would always return before the dawn, remove the wig, cleanse herself of the cheap perfume, and adorn herself in imperial silks to attend the morning sacrifice to Vesta, the goddess of chastity, all with the same placid expression she had worn just hours before, as if nothing had transpired. But the brothel was merely her laboratory. The true operation was conducted within the palace walls. Imagine the lavish banquets. Rome's most powerful elites are sprawled across silk couches, gathered around low tables laden with golden platters piled high with roasted dormice glazed in honey, while wine flows freely from jewel-encrusted cups, as senators engage in idle chatter and generals discuss the ongoing affairs in Britain. It all appears very Roman, impeccably civilized, until Messalina gives a silent cue, the servants vanish, and the doors are sealed shut. Then, a new set of guests is ushered in, gladiators still reeking of the arena's sand, blood, and sweat, actors fresh from the stage, and captives from foreign lands. Occasionally, even the adolescent sons of patrician families are summoned, lured by the pretense of discussing their fathers' careers. What unfolds behind those closed doors? The sources, a key part of this dark history, recount with a mixture of horror and fascination, coerced performances, degrading contests, and senators forced to partner with their political rivals to entertain the empress. Respectable, married aristocratic women, paralyzed with terror, are compelled to act as courtesans, while their own husbands are forced to watch, frozen, from across the room. Refusal is simply not an option. When a tribune dares to decline her invitation, his body is found floating in the Tiber just 3 days later. A nobleman, who attempts to depart prematurely, finds his family's estate confiscated by the end of the week. The message echoes through Rome. The empress does not take no for an answer. Then there is the infamous contest. This particular tale comes to us from Pliny the Elder. While he was documenting natural history, this salacious detail clearly made a lasting impression. It was a competition between the empress herself and a renowned prostitute named Scylla, not for money, but for pride. Who could accommodate more partners in a single night? 25. Messalina was the victor. Pliny records this fact as if he were documenting a solar eclipse with clinical horror and a chillingly fascinated precision. Was it true, an exaggeration, or mere propaganda? We may never know for sure, but the story survived as a chilling piece of Rome's dark history. It endured because it captured something the Romans themselves could not properly articulate. A woman wielding carnal power not as an act of submission, but as a tool of utter dominance. Rome lacked the vocabulary for such a concept, so they transformed it into a myth. But myths are never born from nothing. They are echoes of something that truly occurred, something people witnessed and could never erase from memory. The palace itself becomes a theatre of raw power. It is a stage where humiliation is the currency, where senators arrive at dawn, pleading for favors and depart at midnight, having committed acts they will never speak of again. It is a place where aristocratic families send their daughters into the empress's chambers, praying they return untouched. Most do, some do not. No one dares to ask questions, because, by this point, everyone understands the system. Messalina doesn't merely wield power, she meticulously collects it, piece by agonizing piece, person by person, constructing a web of complicity so vast that any move against her would mean self-destruction. Every participant becomes a prisoner, every witness becomes an accomplice. She has no need for the Senate's approval when she possesses their shame, and that is far more binding than loyalty. Loyalty can be fickle, but shame is eternal. And throughout this entire spectacle, Claudius remains busy, building aqueducts and reforming the courts, even expanding the empire into Britain. He is the competent emperor that everyone so foolishly underestimated. Does he know what is happening? Of course, he knows. All of Rome is gossiping, the senators are whispering, and his own freedmen are pleading with him to intervene. But what action can he possibly take? She is the mother of his heirs. To move against her would be to admit his own humiliation before the entire empire. It would risk civil war and prove every one of his critics right, that he was always too weak to control his own household. So he does what powerful men have often done throughout dark history when confronted with an unbearable truth. He looks away, buries himself in his work, and pretends the decay isn't spreading. This continues until the year 48 CE, a full 10 years after their marriage. This is the year it all comes crashing down. It is autumn, and Claudius is in Ostia, overseeing the critical work of Rome's grain supply. The city's survival depends on Egyptian wheat, and any disruption to it would mean riots in the streets. He is doing his duty, being the capable administrator Rome requires. Meanwhile, back in the capital, Messalina is getting married again. The groom is Gaius Silius, the consul designate one of the most powerful senators in Rome, who is also young, handsome, and fiercely ambitious. He is everything Claudius is not. But here is the detail that truly defies belief. She makes no attempt to hide it. This is not some clandestine affair conducted in the shadows. This is a public wedding ceremony, complete with witnesses, legal contracts, and formal vows, all while she is still legally married to the Emperor of Rome. The ancient chroniclers captured the moment with chilling precision. Tacitus himself wrote of the sheer disbelief, that single, frozen instant as Rome's elite stood paralyzed, watching their empress marry another man in the full light of day. A shocking moment, even for Rome's dark history. Was this a brazen power play, a silent coup in the making? Did she gamble that Claudius was too feeble to retaliate? Did Silius truly believe he could seize the throne through a wedding vow? Or had Messalina reached a point where the transgression itself was the ultimate prize, where the thrill came not from secrecy, but from daring the entire empire to stop her? Her true thoughts are lost to time. We can only judge her by her actions. And Rome, that sprawling, corrupt, and weary city, had finally discovered its breaking point. It was Narcissus, Claudius's most trusted freedman, who first heard the scandalous news. He raced to the port of Ostia, only to find the emperor engrossed in grain ledgers. Just imagine that conversation. How does one inform an emperor that his wife has just wed another man? How do you make him accept a truth so utterly preposterous? Yet, the reports kept pouring in, with senators corroborating the story, and witnesses now emboldened to speak. The detail that sealed her fate was the marriage contract itself, signed, witnessed, and legally binding, an undeniable act of treason. The laughter in the court died. Picture Claudius's face in that instant. The emperor they all derided, the stammering scholar, the man whose very survival depended on being underestimated, now publicly and legally betrayed, while he worked to keep Rome from starvation. The fury that rose within him wasn't a flash of fire. It was a cold, decisive ice. He turned back towards Rome, the elite Praetorian Guard marching at his heels. They located her in the legendary Gardens of Lucullus, a vast estate on the city's fringe, filled with exotic trees, imported from every corner of the empire, and fountains that flowed without end, the very stage for so many of her infamous parties. She was with her mother, Lepida. The elder woman frantically urged her daughter to flee, to act, to do anything at all, but Messalina appeared paralyzed by the unthinkable reality. Some accounts claim she attempted to draft a plea for mercy, while others say she simply stood motionless, incapable of believing her reign was truly over. After a decade of bending the Roman world to her whim, the world had finally snapped back. The soldiers arrived. She knew their faces. She had seen them guarding the palace, perhaps even beckoned a few to her private villa. Now, they were here on a different kind of business. She fell to her knees, begging, pleading, even offering her own children, Octavia and Britannicus, aged just 9 and 7, as bargaining chips, anything to save herself. The soldiers remained impassive. Their orders were absolute. She reached for a dagger. Whether it was her mother's or a guard's, we will never know. Her hand trembled violently. She pressed the cold steel to her throat but could not bring herself to do it. A tribune then stepped out from the ranks. His name is lost to history, but his action is immortalized. He drove the blade home, and so, Valeria Messalina Augusta, Empress of Rome, died at just 25 years old, bleeding out on the very lawn where she once commanded senators. Claudius immediately ordered a Times Damnatio Memoriae asterisk, a damnation of her memory. Her statues were toppled and shattered, her name chiseled from every inscription in a brutal attempt to erase this chapter of Rome's dark history. Official records were scrubbed clean, rewritten as if she had never been born. The imperial message was clear: she never happened. Yet, 2,000 years later, we are still telling her story. You have just witnessed the fall of an empress, brought down not by war or plague, but by the sheer weight of her own unchecked power. If delving into this kind of dark history, reminds you why the past must be remembered, not erased, subscribe to Crimson Historians, because the truth never stays buried for long. It always echoes. The Roman Forum still stands. The Colosseum continues to draw millions of visitors, but the specific section of the Palatine Hill, where the Empress held court, where Messalina reigned, is now little more than rubble. Tourists wander past shattered columns and decaying walls, taking photographs and reading plaques dedicated to Augustus and Nero. They have no idea they are standing on the very ground where she hosted her notorious gatherings. Claudius, for his part, remarried within a matter of months, taking his own niece, Agrippina the Younger, as his new wife. She proved to be far more cunning and patient than Messalina, and would ultimately poison Claudius to place her own son on the throne. Nero's rise to emperor initiated a new chapter of insanity, and tragically, Messalina's children were destined for fates nearly as grim as their mothers. Her daughter, Octavia, was coerced into a marriage with her own stepbrother, Nero, who would later orchestrate her execution under the false pretense of adultery. She was only 22 years old, the very same age her mother was when she met her end. Her son, Britannicus, was dispatched with poison at the tender age of 14, an act almost certainly committed by Nero to erase any rival claim to the imperial throne. The boy collapsed amidst a dinner party, lifeless before a single guest could react, while the Senate attempted to pretend Messalina had never existed at all. But the soldiers could not forget, the servants whispered her name, and the families whose daughters vanished into her villa certainly remembered, only to return forever changed and silent. They all remembered, and this is the part of her story that truly haunts me. How much of this accepted dark history surrounding Messalina is actually fact? The primary sources we rely on, Tacitus, Suetonius, Juvenal, were all men, all chronicling her life decades after she was gone, and each one had political reasons to portray her as an absolute monster. Roman propaganda followed a predictable script. Any powerful woman who challenged male authority was inevitably accused of unspeakable sexual depravity. Think of Cleopatra, Agrippina, Livia, and of course, Messalina. The playbook was always the same. Does this suggest she was entirely innocent? Not at all. The marriage to Gaius Silius did, in fact, occur. That event is well documented, even by those who defended her. The political corruption was undeniably real, and the system of blackmail was fully operational. Those who dared to oppose her often met untimely ends. But the salacious tales of brothels, the notorious contests, the very specific numbers, it's there, will likely never distinguish where the truth ends and the character assassination begins. What we know for certain is this: a 15-year-old girl was wed to a man well into his 50s. She was conditioned to believe her entire worth was tied to her purity and her ability to produce heirs. She was handed immense power with absolutely no instruction on how to wield it responsibly. She had no guidance, no purpose assigned to her beyond bearing children and maintaining an image of virtue. And so, when she discovered a way to feel powerful through rebellion and control, by turning Rome's own rampant sexual hypocrisy back on itself, the very empire that created her, destroyed her, and then spent the next 2,000 years cementing her place in its dark history as a monster. If you stand among the ruins of the Palatine Hill today, you can sense something palpable in the air. It's not ghosts. Rome's hauntings are not so simple. It's something heavier. The sheer weight of stories that refuse to be silenced, even as names were chiseled from stone. Because this is the fundamental truth of damnatio memoriae. It simply does not work. You can shatter the statues, deface the inscriptions, and rewrite the official records, but you can never truly erase the lessons learned. Messalina's name was intended for oblivion. Instead, it achieved a twisted kind of immortality, not because Rome wished for her to be remembered, but because the truth, no matter how distorted or deeply buried, has a relentless way of clawing itself back to the surface. Empires have collapsed under barbarian invasions. They have succumbed to plague and economic ruin. But the story of Rome teaches us something far more insidious, that an empire can also rot from the inside out. Messalina's tale is not merely one of sex and scandal. It is a cautionary account of what happens when power becomes a mere game, and when shame is weaponized as currency. It's a story of when the very people meant to lead an empire are too compromised to halt its inexorable decay. Every senator she publicly humiliated remained silent. Every general she blackmailed feigned loyalty. Every witness to her debauched revelries became an accomplice, not out of allegiance, but out of sheer, paralyzing shame. She demonstrated that you don't need an army to control powerful men. You only need to know the secrets they fear will be discovered. We flatter ourselves by thinking we are different now, that we have evolved beyond the endemic corruption of ancient Rome. But take a hard look at any modern empire, any government, any institution of power today. Ask yourself, how many secrets are holding it all together? How many individuals remain silent simply because exposure would mean their utter ruin? How much of what we label stability is nothing more than shared complicity? The ghost of Messalina doesn't haunt the Palatine Hill. It haunts every corridor of power where influence and shame share the same bed. 100 years after Messalina's death, Marcus Aurelius wrote something profound. He was the emperor at the time, struggling to comprehend Rome's endless, churning cycles of virtue and corruption. His advice? Look beneath the surface. He warned us to see beyond the polished surface, to discern the true nature of things. He was speaking of leaders like her, whose public image shone brightly, while their private lives festered with decay. But his warning resonates through the ages. For the real lesson from this chapter of dark history is not that Messalina was a singular monster, but that the Roman world itself created her. They thrust her into marriage at just 15, bestowed upon her immense power without a meaningful purpose, and then annihilated her when she used it to expose their own hypocrisy. Her name was struck from the records, but her story outlived the silence. 2,000 years later, we are still wrestling with the chilling question of what happens when the guardians of virtue become the very architects of its ruin. You have just uncovered a chilling tale from Rome's dark history, a secret the empire tried to bury, but which refused to stay dead. If accounts like this one serve as a stark reminder of how fragile empires are and how absolutely power corrupts, then subscribe to Crimson Historians and help us keep the past from fading away. Because the moment we forget these profound lessons is the precise moment we are condemned to repeat them.